This presentation is called Disability, Inclusion, and Accessibility. Boring title, interesting subject. The presentation is divided into two parts. The first part, Scam, Sham, and Deceit at the Playground, exposes the misleading claims for inclusion. There is no shortage of photo-op pictures capturing the essence of the deception. The posed pictures are shown as essentially crafty and purposefully misleading. In fact, a second look at these photographs, a more careful look, makes clear that accessibility does not translate into inclusion. Part 2. The second part of the lecture presentation shows that inclusion can be achieved at a play court with a ball. Inclusion happens when the elements of play in a facility are raised above the ground, play elements of varying heights, and by leveling the surface or flattening the playing field for wheelchair participants drop-in play. A ball game without winning, losing, aggression, or bullying, and where size and strength, gender or disability are irrelevant, when you can play alongside, not against others. Companionable, collaborative, congenial, purposeful play, not designed to defeat others, rather designed for self-confidence, self-improvement, skill enhancement, not winning or losing. Climbing and crawling notwithstanding, children are drawn to play with a ball. Children are especially taken with purposeful challenge that invigorates the brain. The breakthrough concept may be reduced to play alongside rather than against others. Ball throwing, retrieving, without aggression or contact, succeeds admirably to move young and older bodies at play. Take note, there are no posed photographs and no close-up pictures of pretending smiling faces in Part 2. Conclusion, play courts may offer the inclusion that accessible playgrounds cannot. Differently abled children of all ages, special populations, and wheelchair participants are enabled to access a play court facility as drop-in participants without waiting for a program. There is integration, socialization, and full inclusion at a bankshot play court, as at any facility or activity where participants play alongside one another rather than against one another, without offense and defense or body contact, and where size, stature, age, gender, and disability are irrelevant. Playing alongside achieves inclusion. Playing against others excludes far more than includes, and often leads to intimidation and bullying, and invariably segments populations of a community. Playing alongside others who are differently able defines and identifies total mixed diversity based on universal design. Part 1 explored. Sham, Scam, and Deception. Notes by disgruntled social justice and human rights advocates. Let us focus on the self-published booklet on inclusion. The booklet is produced by the National Recreation and Park Association and the National Inclusion Institute. Use your judgment whether the booklet and their philosophy perpetuates a serious deception concerning the way inclusion is achieved. The very photographs of wheelchairs users and the differently able they print in their own publication contradict the claims advanced. The pictures invariably show a wheelchair user being marginalized, singled out, and excluded. But put on a smiling face for the camera and have the differently abled child pose at a playground, especially a youngster in a wheelchair, and exclusion is passed off as inclusion. Please look at picture number 1. This is the cover page of the publication of the National Recreation and Parks Association. In picture number 1, the circled figure is a wheelchair user who has been wheeled into a playground which is identified as accessible and inclusive. He is posed watching his toddler daughter climbing upward towards him on metal bars. The poor child looks as though any moment she will totter and fall on or through the ladder, striking her chin or forehead on one of the steel bars. The father in a wheelchair is not positioned next to the child and cannot steady her or reassure her by proximity. Not a good place for either of them to be. The best he can do is to cheer her on from above, but should she fall, as it appears she might, he cannot be there for her. Climbing playgrounds with tubes and ramps, as in the photograph, marginalize the differently abled and their loved ones. In truth, any young person in a wheelchair is marginalized inside the playground, whereas previously he/she had been marginalized outside the playground. The spanking new, accessible $150,000 playground was well intended perhaps, but the play value for a wheelchair participant remains absent. Age-inappropriate crib toys and boardwalks with their tubes and ramps within climbing playgrounds promoted as inclusion contribute to the hypocrisy. The other photographs printed on the Institute's cover can hardly be identified as providing examples of inclusion. The picture on the left barely registers as age-appropriate or inclusive. How does it represent inclusion? I like the bicycle, but is that photo the best to represent inclusion? It's a good thing to be sure, but where is everyone included? Sham picture number 2. The second picture is from the cover of today's Playground magazine. It is a photograph of a Montgomery County, Maryland park, Hadley's Park. According to the cover, the park opens new doors. It tells us further that accessibility becomes a priority. However, it takes no prolonged examination to see that there is no accessibility and no doors are opened. The 2 older children are long past the use of the playground that's behind them. They don't creep and crawl and wouldn't even fit on the sliding pond behind them. The boy in the wheelchair, Hadley, has absolutely nothing there for him, even if they find a way to wheel him inside for another sham photograph. The park named for him excludes him and others like him. The youngster would be marginalized inside, just as he is marginalized outside the playground. What in heaven's name are these children smiling about, aside from the photo op? This is a photograph of an exclusionary structure, presented deceptively as offering inclusion. Even if the young boy was entirely without disabilities, he'd be too old for this. Any child beyond preschool age is in no way serviced by such a playground. Picture number 3. Here's a well-meaning artist trying to portray inclusion. The cartoonist chooses children of different ethnic heritages and believes that a role could be found for the differently able child in a wheelchair. But the child is excluded from the activity. She becomes a referee, holding a flag and blowing the whistle because she cannot participate. Could the artist be thinking that the child in a wheelchair does not feel marginalized and excluded? The artist means well. It's not really entirely her fault that she can't conceive of a sport or activity of total mix based on universal design, a facility offering real diversity, integration, and socialization of every child, understood as mainstreaming for inclusion. In short, the artist has never been out on a play court which accommodates all children. And in truth, there are few drop-in, count-me-in, I also wish to play facilities available for differently abled children and individuals of all ages and conditions. A play place that does not require a wait for next week's program the recreation departments offer. That's one reason why bank shot sports were developed. In this picture, there is no something for everyone. It is rather something for the very few comparable in age, size, strength, and level of disability. Where's the total mixed diversity based on universal design? Where is the mainstreaming of that child in a wheelchair? Picture number 4. Again from Playground magazine on the subject of age-appropriate design. In the photograph of a cute little child reaching for play, what it captures is precisely what is lacking in age-appropriate design. It is as though calling black white is convincing if you say it often enough. What is offered by communities as age-appropriate and accessible continues to marginalize the differently abled, and what is presented by communities to address the issues of inclusion achieves nothing of the sort, and deceives the community into thinking that they are meeting the needs of the ADA, the IDEA, and the spirit of social justice and human rights. Picture number 5. The cover reads, "So that every child can play." Not the child in the photograph or her mother. At best, a modified swing for younger children. That's it. Very little, if anything, can be identified as play. Let's be clear. Typical climbing, crawling, swinging playgrounds with tubes and ramps invariably exclude the differently able and special population children. At best, they provide a few moments of interest. School-age children are well beyond being served by climbing, crawling playgrounds. They are also not well served by contact play and sports intent upon defeating others. They are better served by activities that stimulate both brain and body, and at facilities at which play is alongside rather than against others, where you compete against yourself and self-improve, and do not have to find an opponent of equal level to participate or to defeat. Picture number 6. We might ask concerning the pictures in Recreation Management magazine on the theme of inclusion and play together, where exactly is the inclusion? Where's the play? And where's the together? The child in the larger picture experiences none of these. At best, she is being escorted on a ramp in a playground that marginalizes her not much differently than when she is marginalized outside, looking in. She could just as well be rolled down the street. There's nothing of play or inclusion for such a child, regardless of staged photographs. There's nothing here for her or for others like her. There isn't much even for typical children over 5 who have been there, done that, now what? The smaller picture shows a child watching others at play, and clearly excluded from the activity of climbing pods. Totally staged and clearly exclusionary, one wonders the point of the photograph, except to suggest unintentionally that there has been provided next to nothing for wheelchair participants and others who are differently able. There seems to be little challenge and very little play, even for the able children in the photograph. At best, they will play at this playground element for a minute or two. They are clearly past the age for such an activity. The children are seen together because they were posed that way. Part 2. Picture number 7. Another cartoon of a bank shot court, like the facility in nearby Rockville, Maryland, developed and designed precisely for drop-in inclusion of the differently able, with no contact or bullying or aggression. By contrast, it captures how inclusion is to be achieved, a play court or field of play in which participants engage in play alongside each other and not against each other. Wheelchair participants and the differently able gain access and inclusion immediately. They need not and should not have to wait for a program. None of the typical or atypical children and their families need wait at an inclusive total mix facility such as a bank shot play court. They may come by whenever. The wheelchair participant, special populations, children with disabilities, teenagers with or without disabilities, the differently able, and all members of the community should be offered a level playing ground, accommodating all members of a community, including special populations and differently able participants of all ages. These facilities are identified as total mix play courts, diversity based on universal design. They are intended as full participation, drop-in anytime recreational facilities accommodating substantial numbers without waiting. A collection of photographs, none fake, posed, or deceitful, of full integration and inclusion at play for all post-playground ages and all levels of ability or disability. At Bankshot, there is no contact, conflict, or competition, except for self-competition, not against others. Participants play the challenge of the course, not one another. Alongside play is the conceptual breakthrough, achieving integration, socialization, and inclusion.